I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, February 13th, 2018, and this is a study session for the City of Prescott Council. Let's do roll call, please.
Mayor Mangarelli,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilman Lamerson,
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl,
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
All are present.
All right, thank you. We are going to have a lively discussion about the budget with Mr. Woodfield. Does Lars get to participate as well?
He's here when you
Support.
ask a question because he's
Got
the
it.
brains of our outfit. Yeah, brains and looks. He's the whole
I was
package.
going to say.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have the mid-year budget report. Now, this budget report and this whole budget season, we're trying a slightly different approach as we bring the budget forward. We're trying to, not be so accountant-oriented, bringing you slide after slide of numbers and details that I know you guys enjoy, but we thought the public might be able to find it more informative if we're able to keep it to a limited number of slides, relevant topics, things that people are interested in, not get too involved in the details of all the different funds. Now, all that additional information through the budget process is, of course, going to be available for council to review, but the public meetings, we're going to focus more on these generalized summary things. Today, we're going to look at mid-year to kind of let you know how the first 6 months of the year went, and we're going to cover a few topics in the calendar going for the budget cycle for the 2019. And again, like always, please feel free to stop me and ask any questions as we go. It's a little easier to discuss when it's up on the screen and relevant. If it's coming up, I'll say, just a minute, it's coming up, but we'll try to get there. As we look at it, wanted to get some just general slides, the first few slides, and again, council has the paper version if you want to make notes, or it's up on all the screens around. Looking at the city budget as adopted, 61% of our budget that we adopted is operations. Of our operating budget, 36% is personnel. No real surprises. We're a service organization. We provide service. That takes people to provide service. The rest of it is 39% is capital. We talked a lot during the last budget cycle, and again, just threw this slide back in here to discuss. There's several different buckets, if you will, or slices to the pie. We have our general fund, which handles the public safety, parks, library, and government. We talk a lot about that because that's the service areas that people want to talk about. We have our enterprises, our solid waste, those things that are revenues that are charged for those services. They don't all cover the cost of their services, but that's okay. It makes sense. It makes sense to the public that we account for these things as businesses, even though they might not fully cover their costs. And again, I'm speaking of our airport and golf course. Then we have restricted funds, which have a voter restriction or a statutory restriction on the use of the revenues. So they're restricted. That's our bed tax or 1 cent sales tax for streets. It's a highway user fund, those type of things, grants and those things. So again, just to give you an idea where our full budget lies, and this is just the operating portion, again, 41% in general, 40 enterprises, and 19 in the others. Go forward. This is always an interesting slide just to give people an idea of our general fund, which is that general area, that big slice, the biggest single slice of the pie. We look at the different functions, and we pulled PSPRS, the unfunded liability portion, out of this just to give a perspective to it, because without that, public safety takes up 78% of the general fund. But if we when we get rid of that unfunded liability, when that is pulled out and not really counted against public safety, it's 58% of the general fund. Yes, Councilwoman.
So, Mark, on the slide before, the restricted streets, bed tax, and grants, 443, the 3/4 of a cent.
Will be in there. Is in there, yes. Again, restricted by voter, restricted by statute. Anything that it has a restriction has to be in those funds. Again, here's the makeup. No real surprises. This is a slide from our full budget presentation we did last June, just to bring it up again. again, of the general fund, service fund with public safety, with recreation, with library, with the general government, 84% of the general fund is personnel costs.
Mark,
Yes, sir.
the annual required contribution for PSPRS, is that just included in police and fire and those wedges?
The normal cost is included in police and fire. The unfunded annual required contribution to amortize the unfunded liability is in that separate slice. Sure. Looking at the summary of the budget, we have a $188 million budget this year, huge budget for a city our size. But if you look at it, $85 million is operations. And here we're looking at spending through December. You can see we're about 46% spent. You know, below 50, anywhere up to 50 was where you'd expect it to be. And so we're in good shape there. Our capital is at 22% spent, or 23, not including any contracts that have been entered into, and those expenses have not happened yet. We're working with Public Works to make sure our encumbrance of those contracts is in the appropriate fiscal year, which will make our budgeting a little more level, a little more reasonable as to what we're actually going to spend by the end of the year. Our internal service fund is at 43% of expenditures, which is important to remember as we get further on. Part of that is related to a refunding of the loan for the fleet maintenance facility, and part of that is they've had some turnover in the engineering fund that has, of course, if you have turnover, you don't have expenditures, so those revenues are down. You're also not getting work done, so it's not a good thing, but that does keep those down. We have our extra PSPRS payment. As you can see, we've overspent that, and part of the reason for that is the $11 million of fund reserve was budgeted, but the additional funds related to the sale of the 6th Street property and the sale of the things were not included in that appropriation. At the end of the year, through this budget process, we will bring a new reappropriation ordinance to council to show where we've had to move appropriations around to address things like that. And as we brought those to council, we did point out in the memo and in our presentation that it wasn't appropriated, but we would move appropriations to bring it into compliance. But we like to do those all at once instead of piecemeal through the year. It's a little easier for the council and the public to understand what we're doing when we do it all at once, as opposed to 10 different times throughout the year. Again, the PSPRS tax 443 was budgeted as a contingency because, of course, election hadn't happened. So we have it there. Nothing's been spent. Nothing's been collected. Obviously, businesses are collecting the tax. Businesses will be reporting that tax in February. They're doing it now. The deadline at DOR is by the 20th of February. They have till the end of the month. So this month they'll be reporting. We'll get the reports from DOR the middle of March. And that's when we'll know what our first month was of that. And we'll transfer those monies to our PSPRS trust funds. And then we also this year put our grant our grant appropriations into a contingency instead of inflating department budgets for grants they might not get. We put it in contingency. As those grants are awarded throughout the year, we'll track them. And again, when we bring that reappropriation resolution, we'll show this contingency being moved into the departments it needs to be in. So overall, obviously not a very useful number, but we're 37.9% spent, 38%. You really need to look at each of the components to know what that means.
Excuse me, Mark.
Yes, sir.
We've spent $16.5 million on capital, and we have $73 million in the budget. So does that mean that we will spend up to the remainder in the second half of the year, or is that just what we had on the books that could possibly be spent?
That is what we had appropriated during the budget process that could be spent. Again, like I said, we're working with Public Works to get encumbrances in the right year so that we can get that appropriation, that 73 to be closer to what we will actually spend. Again, it's been a struggle. We talked about that a lot during the budget process, and we'll get there. We're making a lot of progress, but there's a lot of projects, there's a lot of contracts, and we got to keep everything moving while we do all this work as well.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide, slide 6, is the expenditures citywide with a little more detail than the previous slide. We split operations out because that's really the stuff that happens throughout the year, and you can look at mid-year. So you can see most of the departments are below the 50%, with the exception of regional communication. That deals with just salaries and things that have happened there. And as council knows, our regional communication is paid for around 50% by outside people, outside agencies that are part of that center. Those expenditures could be up by the end of the year. It's really hard to tell. That's why we wait till the end of the year. They're trying to meet staffing demands over there, so we need to obviously work with them and make sure they have the staffing they need, and then we'll worry about the slight budget variations. But staffing is the critical part in that area. The non-departmental is, of course, up, and that's related to the payment of the PSPRS, which was part of that contingency, the $11 million that we spent. As you can see there, we broke out capital by airport and public works. The airport is more contingent on grants being received as opposed to just getting the work done type of thing. And again, we're working with public works to get a better number there. And then all of our other are lumped there. They include, the cart replacement at the golf course, the TriTech software implementation that the police department and records are going through right now, as well as the open space purchase, which $3.8 million, which we spent $2 million just recently on an open space acquisition. And the Altwater, the Big Chino Water Ranch capital is also in that other category. Any questions on our expenditures? And again, as opposed to separating them all these different funds, which people don't really care about, we thought we'd bring you this summary look, and it gives you a little bit better idea as the departments as a whole. If no questions, we'll move on to revenues. Again, we're 50% of the year done with revenues. We're having pretty good sales tax growth this year. We're about 5.11%. As you can see, that's bringing in about 54% of our budget, which is well above the 50. PSPRS, again, is separated here and not any revenue there yet. We expect that to be in the second half. Probably won't be quite to the $6 million, but it will be pretty significant in the second half. Bed tax is doing great. They're well above budget. They have significant growth, as you can see, almost 60%. Property tax is, again, collected kind of pretty much in lump in November, and in May, more people pay in November. That's why it's up. It will come in at what we budgeted it at. Our franchise fees, which deal with APS, Cable One, and Unisource. Thank you, Lars. See, I told you, the brains and the looks. We have 3 different utilities that we have those franchise fees on, and again, the revenues there are also slightly above budget. Intergovernmental is good as well. It's because economic activity across the state is higher than was projected by DOR, so our state share of state sales tax is up, as well as our HERF revenues are up above their projections, and our vehicle license tax are up above their projections.
So Mark, our share is the same, it's just their revenue is up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Share gets adjusted each year based on population changes. It used to be every 10, but they've started doing it more frequently. We don't need to go through the rest of them, just some of the big ones. Utility service, of course, is up probably more due to the dry year than anything else. Solid waste is right about where you want it to be. Airport revenues are in good shape. And the golf course revenues are doing relatively well this year as well. Again, our internal service revenues are down. Again, we have that turnover in engineering. fewer engineers, few billable hours. The revenues aren't there, but of course the expenditures aren't there either. So that's nothing to worry about, and we're tracking that. Then down below, so as you can see, our operating revenues are about 50%, about right where you'd want them to be in total. So all looking good, especially when you consider there's $6 million in there that is from the second half of the year. They're really doing quite well. The grants, again, are more dependent on when we get them. The debt issues deal with that WIFA loan that the council just approved a couple of weeks ago, and a possible refunding loan, which we're going to talk about in a couple more weeks and discuss how we're going to approach that. Any questions on revenue?
So what was included in the other category that we're way up on by plus 1.2 million?
The big items in the other category are like county partnering for road projects. So those kind of depend on when the project comes in, miscellaneous interest earnings, things like that. The reason it's up significantly, I believe, is county partnering. Oh, sales of property, sale of the 6th Street station is in there.
So do we get payments earlier than we expected?
Yeah, they're not really as cyclical as, say, tax revenues. They're more lump sum. There's a payment in there related to our Build America bonds, which is around 300 and some thousand, about 10% of that. Those come in, you know, kind of in the first part of the year. The sale of the property came in early in the year as well, and the partnering with the county comes in when the project is up, so that came in early. Any other big ones, Lars?
Councilman Lamerson has a question.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. Bottom line on slide 6 and slide 7, when will those be in balance?
In balance.
You show total budget on slide 6 is 71, and on slide 7 you show year to year what we've collected at 59. So
Okay.
when will we have the 71?
You won't have the 71 because part of our capital budget was available fund balance. Remember when we talked about the fund balance during the budget process? We have a relatively large fund balance in streets and water and wastewater, which we budgeted in capital projects. More importantly, when you look at a balance, you want to look at the operating income, the 55 million, 55,100,000, and comparing that to your operating expenses are 58. I'm sorry, that was the other way. The expenses are 55, the revenues are 58. So we are in balance, we are overfunded of the operations. The capital is coming from prior year revenues that were not spent. So you're not going to get 135 million in revenue. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong side again. You're not going to get 188 million in revenue because part of that was fund balance.
I appreciate your explanation. I just don't want the public to think we're 20 million discrepancy here.
Correct, and that's why we separated out the operations, because that's really the items you want to make sure your operating revenues are covering your operating expenses. And then your reserves and available revenues are covering your capital, which we go into a lot more detail. Even with our new format, we'll have more detail on that as we get into the budget process. Again, this just being a mid-year budget report. Any more questions on revenue expenses? Good questions, good points to make sure the public knows.
Got about 10 minutes before the next meeting.
Really? That's not good. All right, we've got to start going quicker. We'll talk about a few items as we get into next year. Now, PSPRS is a big issue. I wanted to throw 3 slides in here just to show what the rates were and what the budget was, just to make it clear. Now, we have Tier 1, we have Tier 2, and we have Tier 3. All those tiers, even though their normal pension costs are slightly different, Tier 2 looking at 19 for police is 12.35%. The defined benefit of Tier 3 is 9.68, and the defined contribution plan of Tier 3 is 10.51. But they all have to pay the amortization of that unfunded liability. They all pay that 71.73%. So the differential between whether an employee is in one or the other, has a lot of different impacts. But if you look at the impact on the rate we pay, it's not a lot different than the others. I also included the number of employees in each of those plans in the first column related to hired before July of 2011. It relates to they pay 7.65% as compared to 11.65. Again, these slides are more informational for you guys. We don't need to talk about them too much. I want to get to the calendar. This is the fire department. Fire department, in addition to Tier 1 and Tier 2, have a hybrid. We have 17 employees who are 18 employees eligible for that. 17 of them have decided to take the hybrid, which is a defined contribution plan on top of their defined benefit plan. As you can see, they also pay more. They pay 14.65%, and the city pays a little bit more as well. Wanted to cover this. We talk about, since the rates are essentially the same from this year to next year because of our actuarial history and the different changes, even with the increase in the liability, our rates are still the same, pretty much the same. So this year we budgeted $7.8 million for PSPRS. 6.425 of that was for the unfunded liability, but only 5.9 of that is in the general fund. And again, it's more informational. There's been a lot of talk about these things, and sometimes the numbers get confused at where they're coming from, so I wanted to put it down on a slide so you guys would have it for reference. Wanted to talk just real briefly about the items coming up in the new budget. And they're not really issues, they're just items that we need to address as we go through the budget. Council expressed the desire to continue funding the market compensation plan. So, obviously the city manager has directed that we continue to include that in the budget as we go forward. Health insurance, increase in employee health insurance will probably be relatively small this year. It should be under a 5% increase. Don't know for sure, won't know till March, but it will be something to address. Bigger issue, the SAFER grant ends in February of 19. So, as we do the budget, council will decide, do we reduce service levels or do we come up with $750,000 in the general fund to continue to fund those employees? Local sales tax, as we talked through December, I've had the number wrong. It's 5.61% and not 5.11. We're also going to be looking at, we're starting the utility rate study in this year. We'll get it finished up in the next year or get it going. And we're going to have a solid waste study next year as well in fiscal 19.
I have a question, Mark.
Sure.
Local sales tax through December 31 is up 5.61%. Do we have any idea what our local cost of doing business is? Is that up or down?
Cost of doing business in relation to?
Running the city? That's the business?
Understand, Councilman. Our business is a service business, so it depends on what level of service the council wants to offer. The council adopted a budget. We're complying with that budget, so our cost of service is what was brought forward and adopted as that budget. If council wants to increase the cost of providing the business, more community policing, more whatever, that'll be part of the next year budget process. But since our revenues are achieving or exceeding projection, our cost of doing business is well below our revenues that are coming in.
That's what I wanted to extrapolate. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So Mark, on the SAFER grant that ends in 2019,
Yes.
so I'm sure there are plans to reapply. When does that actually get going so that we can?
Yeah, the exposure period will open probably in the fall of the current year that we're in, with awards coming. Actually, let me rethink that. It starts in about April of the current year,
Okay.
with awards beginning in October. If we're successful in a reauthorization of that, it's hit and miss as far as that being reauthorized from FEMA, but it is our intent to move forward with a
So
reapplication.
Chief, you're working on that then?
Yeah, once it becomes open, we'll continue to try to fund those through SAFER. Keep in mind that there's a lot of other competing priorities across the
Sure.
country, and we've had our time at the trough, so to speak, so whether they'll look favorably upon a reauthorization is yet to be determined.
Okay.
A few other items. As part of the budget process, we've added a citywide rate review, so council will see and the public will see one schedule that shows our rates across all of our different entities. If any of those need to be adjusted, other than the utility type rates that take a study, we can look at those during the budget process. We're also going to be looking at a kind of updating our procurement code. It has some items that need to be, just brought up current current with current federal law related to the to grants, so that we don't get in trouble when we have grants. You need to be procuring items in compliance with those things. So we just need to get the new languages in there and all that. Council needs to address, and we're going to bring forward a funding policy for the golf course. Last year, council discussed it a little bit, and the golf course does struggle to cover its operating expenses. Council has acknowledged in meetings that the golf course is more than just the revenue it brings in at the golf course. So we need to have council come up with and adopt a policy related to that, take care of the loan that has existed for 20 years at the golf course, and also any annual shortfall that might happen. We need to come up with a plan to address that. So we'll be discussing that as we get into the new year. We're going to be doing a review of city debt and city debt limits to bring council up to speed on those, and also how the new tax law is impacting those, the new federal tax law. And we're going to adopt or bring forward, council will consider and possibly adopt a PSPRS funding policy. There is a bill in the state legislature that will probably require cities to do it by the end of 2019. We think it's a good idea. We're going to come up with one, bring it forward, so council's desire for this, how to fund PSPRS, can be expressed in a policy. So with that, the last slide I have is the whole budget process. The items in red are the public meetings, or the council participation. As you can see, we have today at the mid-year budget report, a lot going on behind the scenes to get this budget together with the departments. On the 13th of March, we'll be back with Human Resource, doing a presentation about employee vision coverage and discussion of that. The debt book, the debt limit presentation will be done on the 24th of April. And then we'll get into the council workshops in May, and the hearings and the publishing and all that stuff as we get into May, June, and July. Sorry to rush there at the end. Let me know, is there any questions, any detail council would like more detail on?
Questions or comments? Nice job. That was about 6.5 minutes. Way to go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. This meeting is adjourned. We will be back at 3 o'clock. Thank you.